What happens to us after we die? Do we cease to exist? Or do we live on? This may be the biggest question that mankind has ever asked. Where do we go when we die? And who is there to greet us? And why? What exactly does it mean to become a spiritual person? Does it consist of following predetermined laws? Or is it a personal journey? These are the types of questions that we will discuss. Welcome to the Regression Session. Welcome back to the Regression Session. My name is Ian, and this week we're going to be hearing from Brandon, who has had many astral projection experiences. He actually used to officiate a group that practiced astral projection on a regular basis, and he presents his information in a very clear and concise way, and I couldn't have been happier to have him on the show. If you've had a spiritual experience, or if you have past life memories, or if you're a psychic, or if you're a medium, or a past life practitioner, shoot me an email. My email is theregressionsession@gmail.com. Let's head into today's episode. Hey Brandon, thanks for coming on to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the audience, if you don't mind, would you go through kind of some of your background as far as like growing up, your beliefs, and then what kind of led you into believing and practicing astral projection?
Yeah, sure. Well, I grew up Christian, fundamentalist Christian, actually, a sect that thinks the world's going to end in their lifetime and that sort of thing. So I'm not a Christian anymore. I don't agree with their spiritual system at all. And so, I was obviously inquisitive always from a young age, and I had some experiences, some dreams and stuff like that kind of opened my eyes to, maybe there's a bit more out there and that I should look for it. So I kind of made a pact with myself, which was basically like, I'm going to be as honest as I possibly can be with myself and look for things that are true. And not just stuff that I want to be true, but like to just be agnostic about it and to try and see things as they actually are instead of how I'd like them to be. And so that's sort of where I started on this sort of thing. I had lots of sort of strange experiences growing up in my own like personal spiritual life. So astral projection was just sort of the most direct way to get answers, to actually go and see stuff for myself. So that was my main motivation.
It takes a lot of courage to take a life approach like that. I can speak from experience coming from also a largely Christian background of, just approaching things with evidence base. It can be kind of scary for some people.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Because you might find out that the entire world is, just a cruel, empty place. So, but I don't think it is. But there's always that risk in the back of your head. Like, what if I find out that it's just horrible, or meaningless?
Yeah. And for me, it was more like the biggest thing for me when I kind of moved into, because I went straight from like full Christian all into being an atheist. And the biggest thing for me was, what happens to us after we die? Because when I made the switch to being an atheist for a minute there, I was just barely starting to have a family and my firstborn, and so that was like a huge thing for me, right? I was like, what? I grew up like, okay, we're gonna see our loved ones again, and all of a sudden, I thought it just all ends. I've kind of moved to being more agnostic now, thank goodness.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
But yeah, so I can definitely see
Yeah, I
where
mean, I
you're
had
coming
some
from.
questions as far as like, um, like there's some concern of like, well, what if it's just a black screen early on? And then I was kind of like, if it's just a black screen, it's not like I have to endure that. So I was kind of okay with it. And I had enough experiences where I was like, I'm pretty sure it's not, like it just that was my intuition on it. So
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I tried out doing the past life regressions as kind of
hmm
like a joke. You know, I
yeah.
I literally just pulled up a script and I was like to my brother, I was like, "Hey, you want to see your past life?" And he's like, "Sure." And we did it.
Yeah.
And then it blew my mind. I was like, "Whoa."
Yeah.
And then I started doing it more and more and more and more, and people started pulling out verifiable information.
hmm
And that's when I was like, "Okay, there's something to this.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
There's definitely our consciousness continues after death.
Yeah.
I am 100% certain of that."
Yeah, I am as well. And I mean, I've been through there's a death and rebirth experience that's very, very common um in shamanism, that's common in, just esoteric practices, mystical orders, and it's basically the core theme of everything. And I mean, you can even look at the universe coming into existence in a big bang, and then eventually it'll, as far as we know, all the stars will burn out. So death and rebirth seems to be a common theme, just yeah, and inside the whole universe, it seems to be pretty much everywhere. So especially in the supernatural. So
Yeah, and I've come to see that as well in just patterns. There's definitely patterns and things that we can see. So, as far as astral projection goes, because I know that that's
yep.
your main thing. Tell us a little bit about how, like, maybe your first time doing it, what led you into doing it, what kind of walk us into that experience.
Well, the first time I got out of body, I didn't know what it was. I was a kid. I was very young. I think I was probably 8. And I went to bed and I was unhappy because, I'm a kid and I wanted to stay up and do stuff because, kids are hyperactive and whatnot. So I'm like, I'll just imagine getting up out of my bed and walking around, and then maybe I'll dream about, doing things that I want to do instead of Um, and I just got up and got out of body, and I was like kind of like surprised because I was like, "Wow, is this my imagination? Like what the hell is?" Because it was so real, you know what I mean? But then the experience ended, and I woke up and I was like, "Wow, my imagination is really um powerful." Like so that was like my first experience with it was like unintentional. Um, And then afterwards, there was another dream that was extremely impactful, where there was and this is very common in astral projection, especially from a dream. There's a transitional, um, it can be a lot of different things. In this case, in this dream, it was a round door with the face of a lion on it that I walked through. Um, but I didn't know at that time either what it was because I was Christian at the time, and there's nothing about this, obviously, in Christianity, except for a few mentions in the Bible of the spirit or the levels of heaven or whatever, which is very rare. But yeah, so I was in this dream and I was in this. It was like and those old church buildings, like cathedrals,
Yeah.
like a medieval cathedral, and there was these large green grassy hills, and this was just a dream, and this was where it was just a dream. And then I walked down these stairs, and there was this round door in the wall with a face of a lion on it, and I opened it. And then as I walked through, that's when the transition happened, and I was found myself standing in a library, and there was like this it was a narrow hallway, and then it turned into another larger room with a fireplace in it. And so I walked down this, and I remember looking at these books, and it went from like really old, like tablets and these like, like a stone tablet type thing and like these old black bound books to newer and newer books as I went, as if, like you're going through time in a sort of weird way. And as I was going through it, I noticed the writing on the books was like these different languages. And as I stared at them, they would shift and turn into English. They'd translate. And so I walked down this hallway and into this room, and I was met by a person who was standing in the room, and he was 10 or 11 feet tall. And he had curly white hair and a white jacket and pants. And it was kind of like a robe-like jacket. And it had these little facets that were gold clasps. And the threading, I remember specifically, the threading on the jacket was a line of gold, silver, and copper thread. And they went against each other all the way down the length of the jacket. And there was this wind. Like, this is my first experience encountering sort of what, I don't know what they call it, but like the astral wind. And it was blowing out from him. Of course, me being a Christian, I thought I'd like met God or some shit, which obviously I found out later was not the case. Because this is actually, like, people like this are pretty common. It's not that, I'll get into later exactly what it is. But anyways, and so he talked to me and he said, hey, I need you to take these books and move them over here. And I'm like, and then a thing clicked in my head. I mean, we were just talking about past lives. And I'm like, I know this person from somewhere. And I'm like, and I already did this. And that's what I told him. And then it like kind of like clicked. It's like, oh, like a long time ago. And he said, behind the books, there's gold. And so I'm like, later thinking back on that, I'm like, well, I should probably, as I was, later, this is years later, practicing astral projection, I'm like, I think what he was meaning is, if I get good at out-of-body experience and I learn it, then I can teach other people how to do this sort of thing. And that's an extremely valuable thing, because it's like taking the information from one side to another, like moving the books, if you know what I mean. It was very interesting. Yeah. So that was my first actual out-of-body experience, but it was not an intentional one. It just sort of happened. Like the door was there and I happened to go through for whatever reason. Maybe I was called there by him. I don't know, these type of things. So it's hard to know what.
So
yeah.
When you said the word transition,
mm-hmm.
What do you mean by transition?
So when you're trying to astral project, usually the typical method is to lie in your bed and keep your mind awake while your body falls asleep. And if your body falls asleep and your mind stays awake, you will either one of two things. You will either be in sleep paralysis or you will go through a transition. And the transition usually, it varies a lot, but it's often you see yourself flowing through like a tunnel, and there's these lights and like psychedelic type stuff, and then you're out of body. And this is also an experience that happens when using ayahuasca. So it's a DMT related thing, I'm pretty sure. But there's other things that happen. Sometimes you hear people talking, like you'll hear disembodied voices talking in different languages, and there'll be extremely loud noises. Sometimes it's like the sound of pots clanging, bells, all sorts of things. And most people, when they get to that point, it scares them, and that's where it stops. Like they get to that point and they can't get through because it's like a fear barrier. It's like your subconscious mind throwing alarm bells off because it's trying to be like, hey, I feel weird about you. Like your subconscious mind's like, this feels dangerous. What if there's a tiger? These kind of things. That your physical body is thinking about, because your physical body is thinking about survival, and obviously leaving your body as a spirit can be kind of scary for your subconscious mind.
So with those loud sounds, I think there's a word for it. It's called exploding head syndrome. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, it's also hypnagogic state is another word that they use to describe this type of state where there's weird sounds and happenings, but that's not always the case. In my case, it was not frightening. it was just the energy in the room, the actual feeling of it, the tactileness, the realness. There was like senses I didn't have before. That's what transitioned. And typically when you have an experience where the transition is clean, it can be at several reasons. Like, for instance, when you first start astral projecting, you get all these alarm bells, but over time it becomes more and more clean where the transition is just smooth. So usually it's more of like emblematic of how comfortable your spirit is and how like how close it is and how protected, like in its relationship to your subconscious mind. So the reason I don't think I got any warning sounds in that experience was because of the presence of the other person there, I think.
And with that other person, did it feel like a separate person?
Oh yeah.
Or
yeah, it's a separate
okay.
person. I mean, I've run into him several times. I'm pretty sure he's an ancestor from one of the sides of my family. So if you want to talk about spirit guides, I think that's kind of what they are typically. Ancestors, at least in the shamanic practice, it's the spirit of the ancestors that guides the shaman through his practice. So that'd be my guess.
Gotcha. I understand that.
But, yeah.
And in your first experience that was kind of an accident, did you experience anything that that's common in astral projection across the board that you had no knowledge of beforehand?
No, because I don't think that I left the body in a full way. I think that I entered sort of a lucid dream of sorts. And for people who are new to this type of thing, early on, that's mostly what you do. You do not fully disconnect in a real solid manner. And the reason being that is because you haven't like developed spiritually to the point where you can like, take on the full disconnect, because you're still attached to the physical in a lot of ways. And so most experiences that people have starting out, they bring stuff in. Like, I can explain my first time that I got out intentionally. I was sort of tired. I was a little bit tired. And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to lay down and take a nap. So I laid down on my stomach and I had the light on in my room, but I was tired enough and I was comfortable. And so I was like, well, I'll just lay down. I don't feel like I need to turn off the light. And as I laid down, I began to feel like, as I'm, because I was comfortable, I was slowly drifting up. I began to feel as if I could, because I was trying to astral project at this point. And so I was like, all right, I'll try to astral project. And I was able to slide out. And this one, I don't remember what the transition was like, but I also felt like I was just in the right state of mind to get out easily. I wasn't really attached. It wasn't like I had a lot of anxiety, or, I was in a very calm mood. If you have a lot of anxiety, you're going to have more of this sort of like alarm bells going off. So I slid out and I floated up, kind of like levitated off, and then stood up. And I walked around the room, and it was my room, but there was a few things that were different. Like the bed was up against the wall, like not flat. It was just up against the wall. And the light was on, and I could feel like energy radiating out of it, which was kind of interesting, because there's this thing where like people notice electronics. And I know you've actually talked about this in one of your episodes that I listened to, where there's some interesting connection between light and electronics and astral. And that was probably the first time that, obviously, because I hadn't astral projected a lot then, that I had noticed that sort of connection. I'm not sure what the connection is. That's just something that I don't know, and I couldn't tell you. I have theories about it, but I don't actually know. So I walked around, and I noticed that I could still feel my body. So I wasn't fully out. And the room was sort of like, what should I say? Like it was light, and there was, but the bed being against the wall and these sort of things were out of place. And so I think in a lot of ways, like I'd sort of brought with me, because of attachment, I brought with me sort of a perception. And this sort of like dream aspect with it, and I could still like I could move my hand, my physical hand, and feel it, and know that that was part of my physical body. So I wasn't fully out, in the sense that there's still part of my awareness that was in the body, even though I was fully aware that I was, out of body and this is a real thing. I think at one point I tried to open up a portal to see if I could go somewhere, and it just ended up looking kind of grainy, and I could see partway through, and there was like trees in a forest, but I couldn't open it all the way. And then I went back, and that's when it ended. But what typically happens is when people first start, because you can imagine a spectrum that goes from a sort of unconscious dream to a vivid dream to a lucid dream to a partial out-of-body state to a fully out-of-body state. And this is sort of like a spectrum. And it has to do with how attached your psyche is to your physical body, to your dream body, to the near physical, to the etheric, and whatnot. So if your consciousness is fully disconnected from the physical, then you're just going to have the information of the astral, and it's going to be typically very clear. Your sight's going to be better, and you're not going to bring all this information in with you from the dream.
So essentially, the clearer your mind is, the more practice you have, the easier it is to separate.
Yeah, it's practice. It's practice. It's developing a spiritual body, basically.
And when you say separate, you mean leaving your body. So
I think something that a lot of people kind of get wrong about astral projection is typically it's what is actually happening in my understanding of it. And keep in mind, I can't say this with certainty. It'd be almost impossible, because subjective experience is almost impossible to say with certainty.
Right. It's all anecdotal.
But currently, from my past experiences, and I've projected many times, currently what I think is happening is I believe that the root of the soul, or the consciousness, that sort of divine spark, inhabits the physical body and attaches itself to the physical body when it incarnates. And if you don't have a well-developed spiritual body, you're mostly attached to the physical. And the spiritual body that your physical body has is the map of the body that it uses in dreams, so the dream body. So when you first start projecting, you maybe don't have a really well-developed or an awakened spiritual body. It's sleeping, basically. Depending. Like, this could be complicated, but let's just, in theory, say this, because this is what it seems to be. So when you get out of body, you're really entering the dream body, but it's your full consciousness entering the dream body. And so you enter sort of a lucid dream. And depending on how developed your spiritual body is, that's going to be dependent on how much you can actually interact with the astral, the spiritual world, and get real information out of it. So you can just think of yourself as a little point of consciousness that inhabits a physical body. It's like the vehicle. And then when you project, you inhabit the next body up, or like an etheric body, a spiritual body. And this has enormous levels of complexity. So I can give you an example, and this is actually the reason why I think this. So my grandpa's getting older, and he's probably gonna die soon. So about 5 years ago, I had this in my mind that this was probably going to happen. And at one point, actually, the same ancestor that I mentioned earlier called me into their house. So I went there, and I was upstairs, and that's where I found myself. And I walked downstairs, and the first thing that I noticed was that my grandma was there, except that she didn't look like my grandmother. She looked like like a coat, like a black cape or a coat. Now imagine that it's been torn up and tied back together like a million times. That is what she looked like. So, and she tried to stop me because she's very attached to the physical world, in my opinion, and physical life, and she does not want my grandpa to die. So obviously, if I'm showing up there as a spirit and I'm there to see my grandpa off and begin his journey into the spiritual world, obviously she may be opposed that, but I didn't let her stop me. So I went over to him and I gave him a hug, and the ancestor that I had met earlier was sitting there, except he was not in the other form. He was not like 10 feet tall or whatever. He looked just like a pretty normal human sitting having a conversation with him, but he still looked the same. I could recognize it. So I gave my grandpa a hug, and his spirit was in pretty good form. There was like, you could see the light body, and it wasn't messed up like my grandma's was. And then anyways, and that was sort of where it ended. And I left and went back knowing that, this was like the beginning. And after that, I started having dreams. I had 4 different ones where I saw his spirit leave and go up to, the heavenly realms or whatever. And the first one was the good quality body, like the one that was in a good state, that was light. And then after that, it was slightly darker and darker. And then I saw him physically dead. And so it was like all the layers were there. So what I think happens is when someone is getting close to death, their spirit leaves their physical body, like the energetic body. The spirit leaves, it goes and sleeps in the astral or in the spirit world and waits for the reuniting of that sort of spark of consciousness when it leaves the physical to go back and re-enter the spiritual body. At least that's my understanding of it right now.
Have you ever heard of the phenomena of deathbed visions?
Not that specifically. I have heard of like near-death experiences.
Okay, so it's kind of similar. Deathbed visions, it's a phenomena that has been very well documented. There's actually universities that have documented this for like, I think about 40 years. And I think that, I don't know if you know about the documentary on Netflix called Surviving Death, but I believe that one of the doctors in one of the episodes actually is on that show and talks about this. But essentially what they are is these people who are nearing death naturally, and they're not on the influence of drugs. They are not dementia patients. They're not Alzheimer's patients. They're fully lucid people. Okay. And they can have fully intelligent, lucid conversations with you. They'll go to sleep one night. The nurses will go about their business, and then they'll come back the next day and they'll be like, make just an offhanded comment like, "Oh, my wife that died 20 years ago came last night to see me." And it's just so matter of fact. And doctors that are credible doctors, they've kind of been labeled as pseudo doctors or pseudoscientists, but they have the data to back it up. I kind of feel like I have some feelings about them being labeled that way.
Yeah, well, people are uncomfortable, especially with the topic of death, so they like to, whatever they're comfortable with, they want to keep it that way and not question.
Yeah, but they've labeled them pseudoscientists and stuff, which I disagree with, but they have the data to back this up. These people who are fully lucid will have these dreams, and they've actually found that when people are under the influence of drugs like, let's just say morphine for pain, they don't experience this as much or at all, or any way that could be documented. So I'm wondering if your theory, feel free to research this if you want to, but I think that might give you another avenue to explore, to kind of look into this theory, because it is a documented phenomena, and it does happen. It happens a lot when people are nearing their natural death. They're coming in, like, it's almost like they're living half in and half out of this world, which is kind of exactly like what you were saying, but it's documented.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that would make sense to me, it just kind of would make sense, especially if they're like well developed spiritually, so that they're aware and
Yeah, even people who don't even believe in this kind of stuff are experiencing it.
Yeah, I believe it. And I think like something that I think maybe some people get wrong, just in my opinion, when it comes to development spiritually, is I don't think you need to believe in it. I don't think you need to believe anything really, in order to develop. I think it's much more of just like what you put into yourself, I guess, this is the way I'd put it.
Yeah, just like, and it can be as simple. I agree with you. I think it can be as
Yeah.
simple as taking some time to do something for yourself every day.
Yeah, yeah.
Focusing on something that you like to do, being creative,
Yep,
whatever,
absolutely. Yeah.
whatever it is.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily complicated. I think life is pretty I think it's pretty simple. Like it has complexities, don't get me wrong, but I don't think that it's easy to screw up your life unless you're trying too hard. Um
Like you got
so
something to prove or something like that, right?
yeah, well, I mean, and this comes back to Christianity. They have all these beliefs and things that they have to do to supposedly improve spiritually. And I think that the restrictions and the contradictions and the not being able to go with their heart is actually damaging. You know.
Yeah, Christianity, it's kind of a touchy subject here in
Mm-hmm.
the West.
Oh yeah.
But, I'll say that in my opinion, organized religion for the most part is stifling to spiritual growth.
If it's dogmatic, like I guess there's certain open-minded churches, and I think that might be valuable to some people, like to have some structure when they're learning things, starting out. But if they're dogmatic about it, then yeah, I don't think it's good.
The pro
I think you have to be open-minded.
the
So.
problem, yeah, exactly. What I was going to say is the problem comes when people start to ignore evidence, and that's a huge problem. You know what I mean? Like when you learn something and because of your dogma, you practice willful ignorance. And I think that that's a very stifling environment for not only your physical and emotional, but your spiritual growth,
Oh yeah,
everything.
yeah. I've got a cousin-in-law who she was confident that God was going to protect her from coronavirus, and lo and behold, she got it and almost died. So obviously, I wouldn't be laughing at her if she had died, but thankfully she didn't.
Yeah, thankfully.
Thankfully, she
Yeah,
could
and
have died and killed a bunch of other people on her way out. So
right.
thankfully, that did not happen. But.
Yeah, and a lot of what's kind of wild about this little bubble that I'm talking, that puzzle that I mentioned to you, how I think that all this stuff like ghosts and astral projection, past life memories,
Mm-hmm.
regression, deathbed visions, all that stuff, I think it's part of a big puzzle. And people
Mm-hmm.
within that puzzle, like the metaphysical,
Mm-hmm.
for some reason, like the vaccine is like a huge topic. It's a huge conversation.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah, I don't know. Like, from my experience with like spirituality, it's like I don't think a physical thing is really that impactful. So.
no, I don't either. And I had a guest and they came on and they were talking
Mm-hmm.
about how they were on another podcast literally like a couple days before they came on mine. And
Mm-hmm.
the guy was talking to them about past life regressions, and then all of a sudden he starts grilling them about the vaccine.
Oh wow.
And that's what he wanted to talk about really was like, so what's your thought about people getting vaccinated? And I'm like, really, bro?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're not a medical expert.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's tempting for people to go down that route. It's very tempting to think that there's some conspiracy. So.
Right.
Because there are conspiracies, corporations have conspiracies all the time, to not pay taxes or to rip off the consumer. It happens all the time. I mean, planned obsolescence is like an accepted thing in our society. So, and there are conspiracies that are real. It's just they tend to be rare and they tend to be lame. So,
Yeah. I agree with you.
you know,
They're fun to look at.
yeah, like Pearl Harbor, they knew that the attack was going to happen beforehand and they let it go through so that they'd be able to foment the people into war. Did you know that?
Yeah, that kind of makes sense to me.
Yeah, yeah. It came out just a little while back that attack, that sneak attack, was not a sneak attack. They saw them on the radar and they just chose not to.
Well, most of the military or most of the Navy was out on a quote unquote training exercise out of the
Yeah.
harbor anyway. So
Yep.
the
Yep.
damage was widely minimized.
And that's a real conspiracy. And, there are some real conspiracies, but what I tend to find is that people who are prone to fear and thinking that there's some giant conspiracy against them in particular, it's like they often find a home in open-minded communities and they can corrupt it. So I'm not one of those people. So I'm pretty down to earth.
Yeah, I'm very science based, for the most part. Like I look for evidence. I look for verifiable details.
Yeah.
I like to think I'm a very open minded skeptic because of my
Yeah,
background.
it's the balance. You need a little bit of skepticism and a little bit of open-mindedness, and then you put them together. So
Yeah, and the problem that I see is there's people on either side of that because I'm right in the middle for pretty much
uh-huh.
everything. I try to be for everything, like politics and science and
Yeah,
religion. But there's people
yeah,
like one of my good friends is so far like nothing's real, nothing ever happens, right?
yeah,
And then there's other people that I've even talked to on the show that kind of just they kind of just believe that anything goes.
yeah,
So I don't know. I kind of fall in the middle of those where I need to see it to believe it.
yeah. I think my opinion on reality is that it's very strange, and it does like it's a huge spectrum. Like there's probably somewhere in the universe where all the conspiracies we're talking about here are true. Probably somewhere. The universe is huge. I just think it's kind of uncommon. You know what I mean? Like, uh, maybe there is a place somewhere in the universe where there's a planet where they developed a vaccine as a bioweapon, or I don't know. But I don't personally, I don't think it's very likely.
Yeah, and my whole thing is like, what's the point? If they wanted to kill us, why not just let the disease take us out?
There's better ways to kill you.
Yeah,
We got nukes. Like,
seriously. Yeah. Anyway,
yeah, we got nukes.
I would really like to hear about some of maybe the coolest things that you've experienced while astral projecting or projecting.
Um, let's see. So early on, I was still like struggling with Christianity and I wanted to see the heavens and know like, okay, what's actually up there? Like, is there a God? Are there many gods? What, this kind of thing. Um, so I would just, when I would project, and this is actually a pretty good thing to do when you're starting out, is just be curious and go up. Because from how I understand like the layers of reality, there's a lower realm, there's a middle realm, and there's an upper realm. And this is something that shows up in like the Greeks. They had like the underworld ruled by Hades. They had like the ocean ruled by Poseidon, and then the air or the sky ruled by Zeus. And and typically when you're in the lower realm, that's where like sort of darkness, conflict is, sort of dark entities and this type of thing, psychic vampires, etc. Stuff that you'll probably end up killing if you're competent. And yeah, so that's typically not a good place to be, but often people start out there because they're often very attached to the physical, and that's the realm that's nearest to the physical. So you can think of the physical world as like the most shared reality. It's the roots of reality. It's very important because it's the roots of a tree. You need roots in a tree. But it's also can be very violent because we share it in such an intimate way. Like someone could throw a rock at me and kill me, That's a very intimate way to have reality set up. Where you're sort of like the physical layer of the soul, which is the physical body, is manipulatable by other physical beings. So it's the shared reality. And as you go up the spectrum, it gets less and less shared. So it becomes harder and harder for me to affect you. So if we were standing somewhere in middle realm, we'd still be able to interact in a pretty consistent manner, but it'd be very hard to injure each other. Whereas as you get higher up into like the higher realms, it's like there's it's like you were in your own subjective world, and in order for someone to affect you, you'd have to give them permission, kind of. And I think a lot of people, especially people who get into astral projection, they come in with this idea of like, oh, nothing can hurt you. Only if you give it permission. It's just fear. It's these things. And that's partially true. If you are developed in that way, to where you have like where you're able to be in a state which is like correlates with the upper realm. So like they call it raising your vibration or whatever, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. And most people, like humans naturally, they kind of develop all the bodies because we have a very powerful mind that has all these different states. So we tend to be perfectly fine in the astral, or well equipped at least. But anyway, so starting out, I would just try and go up. So I had interesting experiences. I think one of the first times I tried this, I got out of body. It was kind of still in that more dreamlike, like a lucid dream, closer in resemblance. I was in this large, it was like a shopping mall, and there's these stairs going up. So I'm like, all right, I have to go up. So I'm going to go up these stairs. And so I go up these stairs, and I'm just, I'm walking up and whatever. And then I see someone looking at, they were looking at a cabinet with stuff in it. Maybe it was like a jewelry. I don't know what it was, but it was a very attractive girl. So I got distracted, and I sat down on a table nearby. And in the astral and in the spirit world in general, I like to call it the spirit world because the astral is technically talking about the astral planes, which are like levels of heaven. But in the spirit world, things are kind of like malleable, and there's like some level of like your intention gets projected, and people can sense, and there's like telepathic and whatever. So at some point, she comes over and sits down, or asks me to come over, but she changed at that point, and she had extra eyes in her forehead like a spider, and horns. And so I'm like, oh, this is a succubus. I'm like, oh, I ran into a succubus. And there were these other beings there that were like humans, but they had like larger shoulders and stuff. It was kind of interesting. But anyways, and then at that point I wasn't that interested, so I just sort of like broke it off, and that ended the experience. But I did get distracted on my way up, to say the least. That was very interesting because that was probably my first encounter with like a human-like entity that was non-human. So that was kind of interesting. But I never felt I didn't feel threatened in any way. So it wasn't a bad experience in any way. And then there was, another experience where I had a DMT trip in a dream, and it brought me out into the astral, and I went all the way up. It was like shooting up into the sky. I don't know if you've done any research on what DMT trips are often like. But this was not, I wasn't on DMT. I was asleep. So it was just my natural brain's DMT. And I ended up in this golden realm, and it was burning, and like the floor, it was thick with energy and just bright and burning. And I landed on the floor, and I got up, and I was a little blurry-eyed. Like it was hard for me to see up there, which is very typical when you enter a heavenly realm. And I could see that there were these giant, like pyramidic and these towers and these structures that were just, they reminded me of like, I don't know what else to call them, but like energy structures, like a temple, part of a temple, but they were made out of like metal. And the whole place, like it was like a gold floor, completely made out of metal. I was completely detached from the body, so it was like fully there. There was no missing to that experience. It wasn't vague at all. It was extremely powerful, just the energy and everything in it. And I felt very comfortable there. It felt very natural. And so I sat down on the floor to kind of stabilize myself. And I stood up, and I could see these beings. They looked a little mechanical, I assume, and they had these bright white, gold, yellow auras off their shoulders and their back. and one of them I think was holding like this little like white ball in his hand. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna go see what they're up to, just introduce myself. But first, I want to see if there's anything above here. So I flew up to the top and I hit a ceiling, and then that ceiling became the floor, so that it was as if, like, imagine you're standing on a planet and there's gravity, and you're like, oh, this is the floor. And then you shoot off and you land on the moon, and you're like, well, now the moon is the floor when the moon had been the ceiling, I guess would be the best way to describe it. And on that floor, there was all these gold, silver, and copper coins. This is actually a common theory, the gold, silver, and copper. And there's a reason for that, which we can get into later with my personal experiences. And I couldn't see very well, but I looked really close, and they had like patterns, and I don't know if they were sigils or something on them. And that's where the experience ended. So I actually never got a chance to ask them what the place was. But yeah, it was crazy. It was very vivid. Just the energy was just powerful in there, and it's like, it was so interesting.
So do a lot of people see gold, silver, and copper then?
No, I think it's a Venusian thing. One of my experiences, I recovered part of my soul from Venus, and it like clicked in, and like a part of me woke up. I don't know how to explain it. And from what I've experienced and what I've read, gold and white energy is like associated with Venusians, and that's very common in my experience.
So like you may have lived a past life on Venus.
I mean, I can't confirm it, but probably if I was to go off of that information, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've heard stuff like that before. I've heard of people remembering Mars. I've heard of people remembering
Yeah,
Venus, and they just
yeah.
know that it's Venus.
Oh yeah, no, I was above Earth. I was standing above Earth, and I looked out, and I could feel Venus from where I was, like a part of me, and then I came back together, and it came to me, like called out to me, but it was me. Like it's like a part of me came back together and clicked in.
There's this
I don't
there's
know.
this type of hypnotherapy. It's called like I don't remember the exact terminology, but it's like quantum healing is what they call it.
Huh.
And part of that is going into what they call the superconscious and
Yeah.
calling back fragmented pieces of your soul.
Yeah, it's pretty common, that experience. Um, because what I think happens is that, like, when you're alive on Earth, your etheric body, like we were talking about earlier, sleeping in astral after death, sometimes I think it's disconnected and it doesn't fully wake up when you incarnate. I think those pieces of you can just sleep for, thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, I don't know how long. And then at some point when you're progressing spiritually, you open that bridge wide enough and it can walk over, so to speak. That's kind of how I see it.
Is that a common experience then where people will feel almost like more whole after doing this?
Yeah, I think so. I haven't heard about this happening a lot, but in person with people that I've worked with personally, but I have heard of this happening online and in posts and interviews and stuff. So it's not uncommon, at the very least.
Okay, gotcha. That's really interesting. And what's also interesting is that it's a concept across practices, like
Mm-hmm.
the concept of recovering pieces of your soul. It
Mm-hmm.
Now it showed up in Astral Projection. I didn't know that it was in.
Oh, you didn't? Yeah, there's also another one called shadow work, which is very common. People who practice astral projection often always practice shadow work. And shadow work is also about reintegrating the pieces, your own personal shadow, which is parts of you that you've rejected in your life. So it's re-embracing the soul, basically.
Yeah, and I've heard of that too. Definitely, like
Mm-hmm.
especially like a lot of people who are alleged psychics talk about that. Yeah, but that's interesting that concept shows up in Astral Projection as well as like things like astrology. And, it could be, my skeptic side coming
Hmm.
through. It could be that the people who are practicing astral projection are also practicing that stuff too.
Well, altered states of consciousness probably have overlap. It's just the mind. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Have you had any experiences that you were able to independently verify somehow?
Yeah. So for a while I ran a server. I don't know if you're familiar with Discord, that had a lot of very skilled people in it. It sort of died to drama because there's some crazy people in there that kind of disrupted it. But yeah, there were several people in there that were skilled enough that it was very easy to confirm. I'll give you an example. Sometimes we just sit in Discord and I'd be like, all right, I'm going to show you something. And we'd partial project, which is something that I think people should learn full projection going through the normal astral projection states without doing partial projection, because if you're not really careful, your mind can twist stuff and you can end up kind of screwing yourself. So it's better to do full, but we would do partial because we were pretty skilled and we'd all, full projected before. So, and I'd be like, all right, I'm going to show you something. What do you see? And they'd be like, okay. And they describe it. And we'd be like, yep. Oh, no. And we'd like, we do a comparison like this. So yeah, it's pretty easy to confirm if you have skilled people, basically.
Has anybody ever tried, to your knowledge, a controlled experiment like that where it's been verified?
There's been lots of things which are quote unquote verified, but the problem is until subjective, experience can be. I mean, and look, here's the deal. It has been. I believe the Monroe Institute did stuff like that, and they verified a lot of, experiences, and also remote viewing. There's a documentary called Third Eye Blind that confirmed a lot of things. When the military was using remote viewing. But the problem is that it doesn't really matter if you know and you personally confirm it until there is comprehensive, credible studies, people will reject it. And it's going to be a while, I think.
Yeah, and that's kind of the stuff that I was talking about, like any comprehensive studies or anything like that.
Not that I know of.
Especially from credible scientists. The only problem that I see with that is as soon as they touch this with a 10-foot pole or anything like this, they all of a sudden get labeled as pseudoscientists, even if they follow the scientific method to the book and document everything and remove anything that kind of could be looked at as like woo woo or anything like that, and they just stick to the book. It's all of a sudden, okay, you're a crackpot, you're a pseudoscientist, and you can no longer be credible in our community, and you lose your tenure too.
The good part is that the scientific community is much more open now than it's ever been. And the main reason it's more open now than it's ever been is because of two things. One is the study of psychedelics. And the second reason is because of the Pentagon releasing the UFO tapes.
Yeah, I can see that.
So I think they're more open than ever, but it's going to be a while. I have a feeling it's going to be a while.
Well, I almost get this feeling based off of a lot of people that I've talked to and a lot of things that I've been kind of looking at. I try to pull back and look at the bigger picture things. I kind of almost feel like humanity as a whole is on the verge of like almost like an awakening of some kind. And I don't know why I get that feeling, but it comes down to like a few things. Like you were saying, the Pentagon released UFO content, confirmed that it was a real phenomenon. People, especially younger people, are pulling away from organized religion, the stifling dogmas, things like that. They want to find their own way. People are starting to look into more spirituality versus religion. So I kind of, for some reason, I just get this feeling like people are on track for some kind of an awakening. And I know that might sound a little weird coming from a guy who looks for evidence, but I don't know.
I think they are. And I think that's because of the internet. Being able to communicate in the way that we can now. I think that's what's doing it.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you because, I mean, one of my really good friends, he lives across the country from me, and like 200 years ago, I would have never met the guy, So I definitely
Yeah.
understand.
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree with that. As far as confirmation, I've had several. I can share a few of them. Some of them you, well, I'll just start and then I'll explain after. How about?
Yeah, go for it.
So the most definite one was I have a friend who he's a guy in Germany. I met him in Discord. Um, and he one day, because he liked to do like psychedelic drugs. So he messages me and he says, "Hey, I did like 10 drugs. I can see energy. Come to me." I'm like, "All right." He's like, I've had everyone else project me. I want you to project me. So I'm like, "All right, that's fine." So I project him, just partial. We're in voice chat while this is happening, by the way. It's not, I go into a slightly altered state of consciousness. I get partially out and I go. I find it weird because there's like this distortion in his room, and it feels like everything's miniature, like very small. So in order to enter his room, I like go down to a little point of light. The projected form that I take is just this little point of light, little purple light, and I enter through like the pin, like a pinpoint size, into his room, and then I go and I sit down on his bed and I rematerialize as a person, but I still feel like I'm compressed. Um, and so at some point I go back to a normal size and shoot up and out of the room and go back. And then I go, "Okay, well, what did you see?" And he described the exact thing that happened. He was like, "Okay, a little point of purple light," and then it sat down on my bed. And he's like, and it materialized a human form from the skeleton up, and it was really, really freaky. And then he's like, and then it went up and out and it was gone. And that's what he told me.
So that's crazy that he saw that on while he was doing psychedelic drugs because
Yep.
I've kind of been of the opinion that psychedelic drugs are just a different experience, but there's some anecdotal evidence to prove that that's not the case and that it kind of opens up your perception versus sending you signals.
Well, they're not necessary. You can see without them, but some people do use them. It's true. And I think like there is, what would I say is there's probably a persistent theme, like a persistent theme that spirituality even penetrates the physical world, and it does so in the chemical form, perhaps. But you do not need psychedelics to have psychedelic experiences. I can tell you that firsthand.
Yeah, I've heard that DMT, I think it's DMT, exists naturally within the human brain.
Does, yeah. And some experiences you'll have, I'm not sure what's happening in the brain, so it's just, who knows? Because it doesn't have the typical DMT, or at least not the stuff that people typically describe. So
Yeah, that's really
yeah.
cool that you were able to have that verifiable experience.
Yeah, and he said the other people that came, they just kind of look like wavy energies. They must not have been very far out. I think I got pretty far out of body at that point. I mean, I'm very experienced. I've probably, there was a time when I first started out where I would project 3 times a week for months. So I've had more than 100 projections or experiences, and it gets to a point where your dreams start to take on the elements of the astral and the spirit world to some degree, and so you'll have partial out of body experiences while you're sleeping, mostly unconscious. Usually the transition's not enough to make you lucid, but yeah.
So I have asked this to every person I've talked to about astral projection. So and we talked a little bit about it. We talked about the electricity thing, and you said you had a theory about that. First of all, before we move into the second thing, I would like to kind of hear your theory about that.
Okay. Well, so right now I don't really know, but I suspect that the spectrum of light goes on farther than we expect. So I would guess that, at one end there's the infrared, and at the other end there's ultraviolet. And I would guess it keeps going, and we just don't know. Like beyond the X-ray, beyond the microwave.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me.
So, and that would be my guess. It's really, really hard to know. for sure on that one. Though I should, and this is the thing that, because I was saying, I'll have to explain after, because I was talking about confirming stuff. I want to touch on something, and I don't know if you'll want to leave it in, but there was another confirmation that happened early on in my experience. But you can leave it in if you want.
Definitely go for it. I definitely want to hear about it.
So when I was starting out early on, it was in 2015, early or late 2014. And if you don't know, there was a lot of political stuff happening in 2015, 2016. And I began to get contacted by spirits talking about politics. And they'd be like, hey, what do you think about this person? Or, hey, I don't like this person. Or I don't like, it was stuff like this. Okay. And it wasn't that often, but I'd be in meditation. And then I would fall into trance and have a conversation, basically, would be the simple way to describe this. And one of those times, I think I was falling asleep, and this guy's like, hey, I'm really unhappy, because they were trying to, there was, Obamacare had, the Affordable Care Act had, they attempt to repeal it in, which year was it? 2000, I want to say it was after 2016, because it was after the election, I think. And he was really pissed off, and he was talking to me. He was like, is there any consequences if I stop it? And I said, well, look, I don't know. You can do what you want. I don't have an opinion on it. And he said, okay, well, I don't care what I have to do. I'm not letting it go through. And I said, okay, whatever. And I went back to sleep. And then I don't remember if it was the next day, if it was a couple of days later, it was announced that John McCain had brain cancer. And I was like, okay, well, that's kind of strange. His vote's kind of important on this thing. I wonder if this is connected. And they were all expecting him to vote to repeal it. And I think the Senate was split 50-50. And he voted against and stopped it. And then he died. And that happened like right after I had this conversation with this person. So I don't know if you want to leave that in, because it's a bit freaky. But I was a bit surprised. I mean, I wasn't that surprised, because I have had some freaky experiences involving the physical world before. But it was very surprising.
So what do you think it was? Like, who do you think you spoke to then?
Just someone who could influence the physical world. And being a person who's had experience with influencing the physical world before, I imagine that he probably didn't have many people to contact in the spirit world who were, aware of this same scenario happening. And he probably didn't want to piss people off if he was going to kill someone off. So he probably just sent that message out like a broadcast. Like, does anyone care?
That's really weird to think about.
Yeah, it is.
So what's your theory or your conclusion about that whole situation then? If you had to like sum up the whole experience in like a statement.
I think that there's not two realities. I think there's only one. I think it's a straight spectrum from the physical world right into the supernatural or the spiritual. One reality. And I assume they can influence each other to some degree. But that was early on, that was one of the very clear things that was like, oh, like this shit is real. So I take it very seriously, and it's fine if people just want to like self-improve and stuff, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's like participating in reality, like finally being alive. If you astral project, without a shadow of a doubt, when you're fully disconnected from the body and you're without a shadow of doubt in the astral, you're like, oh, this is reality. This is reality, not that back there. I mean, it's a part of it, but it's not the whole thing. So it was very eye-opening, to say the least. I mean, I've had weird physical stuff happen before. I'll tell you one that happened recently. I don't like to, sometimes I talk about things on a conceptual level because I don't like to give specifics because one thing that I've learned as well working in this is that if I give specifics to someone and they're a skilled person, they can find what I'm talking about. And sometimes I don't want that to happen. So one thing that happened recently is I practice something that I think is traditionally called knot magic, where you tie a knot to store energy. And the reason I actually do this is because I had some astral objects stolen from me earlier, and I did not feel like running through the astral trying to find them again. So I just start tying things to the physical world where they can't be accessed unless you can actually access the physical thing. So when you want to access something, you untie the knot. This is the simplistic version, right? So I tie a knot, and then you untie it, right, later to access. So I tied this knot, left it for a very long time. I go and I'm like, okay, probably time to untie that. So I untie it, and then I put it, I put the string back in its little case, and I go to bed and wake up the next day. And the next day I'm like, all right, now for the other two. I open up the case and it's retied. It was very freaky. Yeah.
So was the object that you had attempted to essentially release or unlock, was that still there?
To be honest, I just untied it again. I don't know what to tell you. Like, I was like, all right, maybe it's not time. You know what I mean? But I was like, but if it's not time, then I can untie it again and it'll retie again. It didn't.
Yeah, that's a little weird, man.
Uh, there's been a lot of weird things in my life. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, I guess when you get really deep into stuff, reality sort of shifts.
Yeah, and I had a practicing death witch come on my show too.
Oh,
And
really?
they talked a lot about magic and
Mm-hmm.
the practice of magic and things like that.
Yeah.
I can't remember what episode it was, but yeah, really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Um, it was the episode with Ashton. He actually got me into like trying tarot cards just for research, and I've had some
Oh,
pretty
yeah.
weird experiences with tarot cards. And like I always say this, it may or may not be real, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I've had very interesting experiences with tarot cards.
I think maybe real is the wrong term, right? Like, what does that mean? You know what I mean? Because it's what I would say is it's life. I'm enjoying it. I'm embracing it. And if it's all fake in the end, I'm pretty much at peace with it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just here for the ride and it's enjoyable. So,
Well, there you have it.
yeah.
That's what we'll call the episode.
Okay.
I'm just here for the ride. Well, Brandon, I know that you want to keep your anonymity. I can't even say that word.
It's a difficult word. Yeah, I don't want the attention it attracts because there's been some really strange things that happened. And when you talk about them in an open way, some people like to, they're a little bit too attracted to it. It's kind of weird.
And so I know that you probably don't have like a website or a blog or anything that you want people to follow.
No.
Okay. Well,
If I ever feel like I need to or that I don't care about my anonymity, I'm more than happy to come on again and plug websites or something. But at the moment, I'm not.
okay, great. Well, is there any message that you would like to leave for my audience?
Yeah, I'll give them, I think, my perspective that I've learned from sort of the experiences I've had. First of all, letting go and detachment from the physical world, as long as it's temporary. You don't want to so detach that it doesn't mean anything. You want the physical world to mean something. It's like the roots of the spiritual world, the lowest plane, the roots, or maybe there's the abyssal after that. So maybe it's not the lowest, um, but letting go is really important because we live in sort of a very fast society where things happen fast, and eventually you get old and you have to see all your friends die. So I know that's a terrible thing to say, but it's true. And being able to let go and embrace reality is very, very important to, well, not only your mental health, but just being able to enjoy your life. The second thing I would say is trust your soul. I think there's a divine part of everyone. I think that's what consciousness is, the ability to experience these type of things. I believe it's divine. And I think that you can overcome anything. I wrote something to remind myself of that. So I'll just read that. I swear to myself, I'll be honest, even though I don't know what that means. I trust that somewhere in the highest, there's a divine part of me. And I think the key is if you're too attached, like you're holding on to something, you can be manipulated by the thing you're holding on to. So if you're afraid of the spirit world, it's probably because you're attached. And you're attached to, reality as you're comfortable with it. And if you're not attached, things really can't touch you because they don't have a way of getting to you, because the physical world, the near physical, the lower realms, those are the shared worlds. Those are the worlds where I can affect you and you can affect me. And if you're capable of finding that detachment from the physical, then if something bad happens, you just detach and it can't influence you. So, and then if you are interested in practice this, I would stay away from people at first and other practitioners because it can get really messy. There's a lot of drama. People trying to curse other people or with them or enter their dreams or whatever. So I would just stay away from that and just figure out yourself first.
Well, that's perfect. Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, Brandon, thank you very much for coming on my show and sharing your time with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
That's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Brandon for coming onto the show, and I'd also like to thank you for tuning in. Remember, if you've had a past life experience, if you're an astral projector, if you're a past life regression therapist, or if you're just a psychic medium, shoot me an email. My email is theregressionsession@gmail.com, and I would love to have you on the show.